First contact gone wrong. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the helm of the ESS Prometheus, Earth's first faster-than-light capable diplomatic vessel, watching the massive space station of the Galactic Assembly grow larger in the viewscreen. After centuries of wondering if humanity was alone in the universe, first contact had come in the form of a simple message: "Welcome to the galactic community. Please send representatives." Final approach vector confirmed. Lieutenant Rodriguez announced from the navigation console. "Station control is directing us to Docking Bay 7. Chen nodded, straightening her pristine white uniform. 20 years in the Earth Space Force hadn't prepared her for this moment. No one could have prepared for this. Behind her, Ambassador Marcus Wright adjusted his tie for the 100th time. "Nervous, Marcus?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Terrified," he admitted with a slight smile. "We're about to meet actual aliens. Everything we say and do will be recorded in human history." The docking procedure went smoothly, almost disappointingly routine. As the airlock sealed and pressure equalized, Chen couldn't help but wonder if humanity was truly ready for this step. The latest intelligence suggested there were at least 30 different species represented in the assembly, some with spacefaring histories stretching back millennia. The welcome ceremony was everything they had imagined and nothing they had expected. The assembly chamber stretched hundreds of meters upward, with floating platforms carrying representatives of various species. Some were humanoid, others defied description. Chen spotted what appeared to be a floating crystal matrix communicating through light pulses, and something that looked suspiciously like a sentient gas cloud. High Counselor Zarkax, a tall, elegant being with iridescent scales and 4 arms, stepped forward to greet them. "Welcome, children of Earth," they said, their words automatically translated by the station's systems. "We have watched your development with great interest." Ambassador Wright bowed slightly. "We are honored too." The chamber's warning systems suddenly blared to life. Red emergency lights pulsed as massive warships materialized outside the station's shields. "HFY vessels," someone shouted. "They're charging weapons." Chen's tactical training kicked in as she assessed the situation. 3 warships, each easily dwarfing the Prometheus, their hull designs aggressive and predatory. The main screen activated, revealing a reptilian face with blood-red scales and yellow eyes. "So," the HFY commander hissed, "these are the new primitives. Let us see if they understand their place in the galaxy." High Counselor Zarkax stepped forward. "Commander Vexthor, this is a diplomatic function. The HFY Empire has no authority here." "We have authority wherever we choose," Vexthor replied. "These humans wish to join the galactic community. Let them prove they understand the natural order. Humans, kneel before your superiors and swear fealty to the HFY Empire, or we will destroy your vessel and everyone aboard it." The chamber erupted in worried murmurs. Chen noticed several species automatically lowering their heads or assuming submissive postures. Even High Counselor Zarkax's scales had dulled slightly. Ambassador Wright cleared his throat. "Commander Vexthor, with all due respect, humanity doesn't respond well to threats. Perhaps we could discuss this like rational beings." The HFY commander's eyes narrowed. "You dare to suggest equality? Your species only achieved FTL travel last year. You are nothing but insects compared to us. You have one standard cycle to submit, or we will demonstrate our superiority." Chen stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Commander, I should warn you. Throughout human history, whenever someone has demanded our submission, things have tended to go very poorly for them." The chamber fell silent. Several assembly members stared at the humans in shock. High Counselor Zarkax made a gesture that might have been the alien equivalent of covering their eyes in embarrassment. "You threaten us." Vexthor laughed, the sound like grinding metal. "Your single ship against our fleet." "Not a threat," Chen replied. "Just a historical observation. You see, humans have this interesting quirk. The more someone tries to force us to submit, the more we tend to do the exact opposite." Wright nodded in agreement. "We call it digging in our heels." Fascinating cultural phenomenon. Really, the harder you push us, the harder we push back. Impossible, one of the assembly members whispered. They're facing certain death. Why hasn't their surrender response activated? Vexthor's expression shifted from amusement to confusion, then to anger. All species have a surrender response. It is a basic survival mechanism. Funny thing about that, Chen said, allowing herself a small smile. We seem to have missed that particular evolutionary memo. But we did develop something else instead. We call it spite. The Prometheus's engines hummed to life, its weapons charging. It was a suicide move. They couldn't hope to win against 3 HFY warships. But as Chen gave the order to battle stations, she saw something in the assembly members' expressions change. It wasn't just fear anymore. There was curiosity there, and something else. Respect. The first contact ceremony had definitely gone off script. But as Chen prepared her ship and crew for what could very well be their last stand, she couldn't help but think that perhaps this was exactly what the galaxy needed. A reminder that some principles were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. And if there was one thing humans did better than anyone else in the universe, it was beating impossible odds. The breaking point. The emergency session of Earth's Security Council stretched into its 14th hour. Holographic displays showed the 3 HFY warships maintaining their position near the assembly station, weapons still trained on the Prometheus. Admiral Chen's face floated in the center of the room, her transmission delayed by several minutes despite the quantum entanglement communicators. They're demanding Earth's complete surrender within 48 hours, she reported. The assembly is confused by our reluctance to comply. Apparently, most species have biological imperatives that force them to yield when faced with overwhelming force. General Maria Santos, commander of Earth's Defense Forces, leaned forward in her chair. And what do our new alien friends suggest we do? Submit now. Minimize casualties. Chen's hologram flickered. The High Counselor privately advised that resistance would be seen as proof that humanity is too primitive for galactic society. President Kiyoshi Tanaka stood by the window of the underground chamber, watching the sunrise over the Rocky Mountains. How primitive do they consider the concept of freedom, I wonder? He turned to face the assembled leaders. What are our options? The HFY fleet numbers in the thousands, Santos reported. We have exactly 27 ships capable of FTL travel, most of them retrofitted cargo vessels. In a direct confrontation, she left the sentence hanging. Dr. Emily Patel, head of Xenotechnology Research, raised her hand. There might be another way. We've been studying the Assembly's public technical database. Their weapons technology is advanced, but their tactical thinking is limited. Limited how? Tanaka asked. They fight like they evolved, with clear hierarchies and predictable responses. When a superior force appears, inferior forces submit. It's literally coded into their DNA. Patel's eyes gleamed with excitement. But we don't have those limitations. We can think outside their box because we never had a box to begin with. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Strategies were proposed and dismissed. Traditional military options were evaluated and found wanting. But as the debate continued, a pattern emerged, one that made the alien observers stationed on Earth increasingly uncomfortable. The humans weren't discussing how to surrender. They were discussing how to win. Back on the assembly station, Admiral Chen received Earth's official response to the HFY ultimatum. As she read it, her professional demeanor cracked slightly, allowing a small smile to escape. Well, Commander Vexthor demanded, his massive hologram looming over the assembly chamber. Do the primitives submit? Chen cleared her throat and read the response. Dear Commander Vexthor, thank you for your generous offer of submission. After careful consideration, humanity respectfully chooses option C. The translator systems stuttered for a moment, as if confused. Vexthor's scales rippled with irritation. There was no option C. Submit or be destroyed were the only choices. That's exactly why we made a third option. Chen replied calmly. You see, humanity has a long history of creating alternatives when we don't like the choices presented to us. High Counselor Zarkak stepped forward. Admiral Chen, please. The HFY Empire has never been defeated in a direct confrontation. Their technological superiority will last exactly as long as it takes us to understand it. Chen interrupted. Humanity has another interesting trait. We learn fastest when someone tells us we can't do something. The assembly chamber erupted in chaos as Chen transmitted Earth's detailed response. The first page was a comprehensive analysis of observed weaknesses in HFY ship design, compiled in the mere days since first contact. The second page was a preliminary blueprint for exploiting those weaknesses, using technology that humanity had no right to understand yet, let alone improve upon. The final page was simpler, a historical summary of every empire that had demanded humanity's submission throughout Earth's history and what had happened to them. Impossible, Vexthor snarled, but there was something new in his voice, something that sounded suspiciously like uncertainty. You cannot seriously intend to resist. You will be destroyed. Probably, Chen agreed. At first, we're badly outnumbered and working with inferior technology. The first few battles will likely go very badly for us. Her smile widened slightly. But Commander, that's the fascinating thing about humans. We don't actually need to win the first battle, or even the 10th. We just need to learn from each loss, adapt, and keep coming back. The assembly members watched in stunned silence as Chen transmitted her final message. Commander Vexthor, humanity's response to your ultimatum is this. We will not submit, we will not surrender, and we will not stop. The choice before you isn't whether you can defeat us. The choice is whether you want to start a fight that will only end when either your empire falls or humanity does. We suggest you choose carefully. As the transmission ended, one of the younger assembly members turned to High Counselor Zarkax. They're bluffing. They must be. No species would choose extinction over submission. Zarkax's scales had taken on a deep, troubled hue. That's what makes them so dangerous. They're not bluffing. They've already accepted the possibility of extinction and decided the principle is worth it. In the tense silence that followed, the assembly began to realize that they weren't witnessing first contact with a primitive species. They were witnessing first contact with something they'd never seen before, a species that had evolved to view surrender as a choice rather than a necessity, and they had just backed that species into a corner. Adaptation and innovation. Dr. Emily Patel's underground laboratory hummed with activity. Holographic displays showed dissected HFY weapon designs floating alongside human modifications. Teams of engineers worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and determination. They had 6 days until the HFY fleet arrived at Earth, and impossible deadlines had always brought out humanity's creative side. "Show me the shield frequency analysis again," Patel called out, her eyes red from lack of sleep. The hologram shifted, displaying complex wave patterns. There, that's our weakness, but it's also theirs. The HFY's first attack had destroyed 3 human ships, but it had also given Earth scientists their first real look at advanced alien technology in action. The assembly had expected humanity to break after those losses. Instead, they cannibalized the wreckage and learned more about alien tech in a week than they were supposed to learn in a decade. Dr. Patel, a young engineer, burst into the lab, tablet in hand. The quantum entanglement test worked. We successfully reversed the polarity of their shield harmonics. Patel allowed herself a small smile. The HFY's greatest strength was about to become their greatest vulnerability. Their shields were technically perfect, which meant they were perfectly predictable. In orbit, Admiral Chen watched the modifications being made to her remaining fleet. The ships looked ugly now, covered in jury-rigged additions that would have made any assembly engineer cringe. But humanity had long ago learned that elegant solutions weren't always the best ones. "Status report," she ordered, walking through the Prometheus's newly reorganized bridge. Every surface was covered with hybrid human-alien interfaces, looking like a mad scientist's playground. Engineering reports shield modifications at 89% completion. Lieutenant Rodriguez responded, "Weapon systems are, well, they're something, ma'am. Not sure the Craxley will even recognize what we've done to their designs." Chen nodded. The Assembly's technological database had been intended as a basic introduction for new species. Instead, humanity had treated it like a challenge, combining technologies in ways their creators had never intended. Message from General Santos, ground side. The communications officer announced. Project Trojan Horse is ready. The plan was insane. Most of Earth's strategic AI had agreed it was suicide. But as Chen had pointed out, that was exactly why it might work. The Craxley understood technology, but they didn't understand humans. In her private quarters, Chen reviewed the final numbers. Earth's fleet was outnumbered 20-1. Their weapons were centuries behind Craxley technology. By any logical measure, this was a fight they couldn't win. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting logic when it stood in the way of necessity. The first signs of the Craxley fleet appeared exactly on schedule. Massive ships dropping out of FTL in perfect formation. Commander Vexthor's face appeared on every screen in Earth's defense network, his scales gleaming with anticipated triumph. "Your time is up," he announced. "Submit or be destroyed." Chen took a deep breath, exchanged glances with her bridge crew, and gave the order that would change the course of galactic history. Execute Operation Murphy's Law. Earth's ships scattered in seemingly random directions, their movements erratic and unpredictable. The Craxley fleet, programmed for traditional space combat, hesitated at the apparent chaos. That hesitation cost them everything. The modified human shields pulsed with energy, creating feedback loops in the Craxley's perfect defensive systems. Weapons that should have been harmless to advanced alien technology proved devastating when combined in ways their creators had never imagined. But the real surprise came from the cargo ships, vessels the Craxley had dismissed as irrelevant. As they approached the alien fleet, their hulls split open, revealing not cargo but thousands of tiny fighter craft. Each one was piloted by a VI system programmed with centuries of human aerial combat maneuvers that made no sense in space, and that's exactly why they worked. Impossible. Vexthor's voice boomed across the command channel. "Your species cannot have developed these technologies so quickly." "We didn't develop them," Chen replied calmly. "We stole them, improved them, combined them in ways you considered impossible because you never had to think about fighting that way." She watched as another Craxley capital ship shields failed under the assault of techniques that violated every principle of proper space combat. "That's the thing about humans, Commander. We don't play by the rules. We change them." The battle raged for hours. Earth's forces took heavy losses, but each destroyed human ship provided data that was instantly analyzed and used to improve their tactics. The Craxley found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger with each defeat, learning and adapting in real time. From the assembly station, the gathered species watched in stunned silence. They saw techniques and technologies they had developed over millennia being deconstructed, recombined, and reproposed in ways that defied their understanding of what was possible. High Counselor Zarkax turned to their advisors. "Are they all like this?" "Every human." "Yes," came the reply. "Their entire history is filled with examples of being presented with impossible situations and simply refusing to accept them as impossible." On Earth, Dr. Patel's team worked frantically to process the battle data, developing countermeasures and improvements, even as ships on both sides were destroyed. They weren't just fighting with technology anymore. They were fighting with humanity's greatest weapon, the ability to look at established rules and ask, why not do it differently? As the battle entered its final phase, Shen transmitted one last message to Commander Vexthor. "This is your last chance to withdraw. We've learned enough about your technology now to make this really interesting." The response was a barrage of fire that destroyed 3 more human ships. But as Chen watched her crew coordinate their counterattack, she saw something she never expected to see in an alien's eyes. Fear. The paradigm shift. The Assembly's Emergency Council chamber was in chaos. Representatives from 100 species argued as footage of the Earth battle played on floating screens throughout the room. The images showed human ships fighting in ways that violated every established principle of space combat, succeeding through methods that should have been impossible. High Counselor Zarkax watched as a particularly heated debate broke out between the Nexian and Volta representatives. The Nexians, previously known for their absolute submission to stronger species, were asking unprecedented questions about their own surrender responses. Order, Zarkax called, their scales shifting to a commanding purple hue. We must address the situation at hand. The Krakstoi fleet has withdrawn to regroup, but this conflict is far from over. A representative from the Synthetic Species Collective stepped forward, their crystalline form refracting light across the chamber. The humans have achieved what our calculations deemed impossible. They have forced the Krax-V to retreat, not through superior technology or numbers, but through unpredictability. Worse than that, another member added, they're making others question the natural order. Reports are coming in from dozens of worlds. Species are beginning to ask why they submit so easily to stronger forces. In the medical wing of the station, Dr. Lyra Val, the Assembly's chief xenobiologist, reviewed her latest findings with growing concern. The neural scans of human prisoners of war had revealed something unprecedented. Where other species showed clear patterns of submission when faced with overwhelming force, the human showed increased activity in regions associated with problem-solving and determination. "Show me the comparative analysis again," she ordered her eye assistant. The holographic display shifted, showing brain patterns from various species side by side. "It's not that they lack the surrender response," she muttered. "They've somehow evolved to override it with something else entirely." The door chimed, and Ambassador Wright entered the medical bay. Despite being technically a prisoner, he carried himself with undiminished confidence. "Found anything interesting in our brains, Doctor?" "Your species is impossible," Lyra stated flatly. "You have the same basic neural architecture as other sentient beings, but you've developed what appears to be a cognitive override. When faced with overwhelming force, instead of triggering submission, your brains actually become more active, more creative." Wright smiled. "We have a saying on Earth. Necessity is the mother of invention. Nothing makes humans more innovative than being told something's impossible." On the other side of the station, in a secure conference room, Admiral Chen met with representatives from several minor species who had long lived under Krax-V dominion. They had requested the meeting in secret, their expressions a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Teach us," the Rylaxian ambassador whispered, their feathered crest trembling. "Teach us how to fight back." Chen studied their faces carefully. "It's not just about fighting," she explained. "It's about believing you can win, even when every logical analysis says you can't. It's about choosing to stand up, knowing you'll probably fail, but doing it anyway because the alternative is unacceptable." "But the biological imperative," one of them began. "Can be overcome," Chen interrupted. "Humans did it through thousands of years of choosing to resist rather than submit. We failed countless times, but each failure taught us something new. You can learn it too." The news spread through the galactic information networks like a virus. Footage of human ships fighting impossible battles was shared between species. Stories of Earth's history, of small groups standing up to overwhelming forces, began circulating among populations that had never considered resistance possible. The Krax-Vi Empire faced something they had never encountered before, not just an enemy that refused to submit, but an idea that threatened to unravel the very foundation of their power. Their dominion had always relied on the biological certainty that weaker species would submit to stronger ones, but humanity had introduced doubt into that equation. In her private quarters, High Counselor Zarkax reviewed reports from across the galaxy. Minor species were beginning to show signs of resistance. The careful hierarchies that had maintained galactic peace for millennia were starting to crack. And at the center of it all was humanity, a species that had arrived barely a month ago and had already catalyzed more change than the Assembly had seen in centuries. They're not just fighting the Craxley anymore, she realized. They're changing how every species thinks about submission and resistance. The Assembly's predictive AI systems were throwing up warning after warning. The probability of widespread social upheaval was increasing exponentially. Species that had been safely categorized as naturally submissive were showing unprecedented behaviors. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic stability was beginning to unravel. A junior counselor burst into Zarkax's chamber, their scales pale with alarm. "High Counselor, we're receiving reports from the Craxv border worlds. 3 minor species have declared independence, citing humanity's example as their inspiration. They're fighting back using modified versions of human tactics." Zarkax moved to the window, watching the endless stream of ships moving through the space around the station. Everything was changing, and for the first time in their long life, they weren't sure if even the Assembly could control the outcome. In the medical bay, Dr. Lyra made one final note in her report. Humanity's most dangerous weapon isn't their technology or their tactics. It's their ability to make other species question whether submission is truly inevitable. They haven't just introduced new ways of fighting. They've introduced new ways of thinking. And that may prove more revolutionary than any weapon they could have brought to the galaxy. Victory through persistence. The Galactic Core blazed through the Prometheus's view screen as Admiral Chen watched the massive Craxv Armada approach. After 3 months of escalating conflict, the Empire had committed its entire main fleet, over 5,000 warships, to what they promised would be humanity's final defeat. "They still don't understand," Chen murmured, studying the perfect formation of the approaching ships. Behind her, Ambassador Wright nodded in agreement. "They think if they just bring enough force, we'll finally give in and act like proper defeated beings," he said. "They haven't learned that humans don't work that way." Earth's fleet had grown, not just in size, though the shipyards had been working around the clock, but in capability. Every defeat, every lost ship, every failed tactic had taught them something new. Dr. Patel's teams had taken alien technology and twisted it in ways that made their original designers recoil in horror. But more importantly, they weren't fighting alone anymore. Signal from the Rylaxian resistance fleet. Lieutenant Rodriguez announced. "They're in position and awaiting your command." On dozens of screens around the bridge, similar messages appeared. Species that had lived under Craxv dominion for generations had watched humanity's resistance and found something they'd thought lost forever: hope. More than that, they'd found a way to override their own surrender responses, following humanity's example of choosing defiance over submission. "The Assembly observation ships are maintaining their position," Tactical reported. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies, documenting everything." Of course they were. The Assembly had realized this wasn't just another border skirmish or power struggle. This was a moment that would redefine galactic society itself. Commander Vexthor's image appeared on the main screen, his scales now bearing the deep crimson of supreme military authority. "This ends today," he declared. "You have corrupted the natural order. Species that knew their place now rise above their station. The hierarchy that maintained peace for millennia threatens to collapse." "Funny thing about peace maintained through fear," Chen replied. "It's not really peace at all. But you're right about one thing. This does end today." She gave a signal, and Earth's fleet began to move. Not in the chaotic patterns they used before, but in precise, coordinated formations. Formations that looked eerily familiar. "They're mimicking our attack patterns," a Craxv officer reported, confusion evident in their voice. "Exactly," Chen confirmed. "We learned how you fight, and then we learned how to fight better. That's what humans do. We adapt, we improve, and we never, ever stop learning." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. Earth's fleet, supported by ships from a dozen formerly submissive species, didn't just fight the Craxley. They systematically dismantled everything the Empire had relied upon for victory. Perfect shield harmonics were disrupted by intentionally imperfect counterparts. Flawless formations were broken by tactics that sacrificed efficiency for unpredictability. And most importantly, every time the Craxley adjusted their strategy, they found their opponents had already anticipated and countered it. From the assembly observation ships, High Counselor Zarkax watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation. They're not just winning, they realized. They're teaching everyone else how to win too. The turning point came not from a superweapon or a brilliant strategy, but from a simple transmission that Chen broadcast to every ship in the Craxley fleet. To all Empire personnel, you have a choice. The surrender response you've relied upon for so long. It's not destiny. It's not inevitable. It's a choice. And today, you can choose differently. Across the battlefield, something unprecedented happened. Craxley ships began breaking formation. Not many at first. Just a few on the edges of the fleet. But it was enough to create confusion, to disrupt the perfect coordination the Empire had always relied upon. Impossible. Vex Thor rage. The command hierarchy cannot be broken. That's your problem, Chen replied. You still think in terms of what can't be done. Humans, we specialize in impossible things. The battle's outcome was never really in doubt after that. The Craxley Empire, faced with an enemy that refused to submit and allies who had learned to do the same, found itself fighting not just against superior tactics, but against the very idea of inevitable submission. 1 month later, Chen stood in the assembly chamber again. The peace treaty being signed wasn't just between Earth and the Craxley Empire. It was a new framework for galactic society, one based on cooperation rather than domination. We still don't fully understand how you did it, High Counselor Zarkax admitted privately. Not just the military victory, but how you taught others to overcome their own biological imperatives. We didn't teach them anything they didn't already have, Chen replied. We just showed them it was possible. Sometimes that's all anyone needs, proof that the impossible isn't. As she watched representatives from formerly submissive species taking their places as equals in the assembly, Chen thought about how far they'd come. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy expecting to find advanced civilizations that would guide them to the stars. Instead, they'd found that their greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't technology or military prowess, but something far simpler: the idea that submission was a choice, not a destiny. Dr. Lyra's final report to the Assembly summed it up best. Humanity's true contribution to galactic society wasn't teaching others how to fight. It was teaching them how to refuse to submit, not through elimination of the surrender response, but through the simple, profound discovery that biology isn't destiny. That in the face of even the strongest imperatives, there is always a choice. And that, perhaps, was humanity's greatest victory, not the battles they'd won, but the changes they'd inspired. In showing the galaxy that impossible things happened every time someone refused to accept limitation, they'd changed not just the balance of power, but the very nature of what species thought was possible. The age of inevitable submission was over. The age of choosing to stand, regardless of the odds, had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.